Hello, everyone. Hope you're okay. Probably can't hear me that well because I've got the microphone around there, but let's see if we can turn our microphone on. Turn that on. Oh, good lord, that's bright. Oof. That's more like me. That is more like me. Right then, now we reduce that down so I can actually see. And then we pop this out. And please do tell me, is it working today? Because I've done exactly the same as I did the other day and it stopped working then. So I want to know it's working. Sound and video, visuals, everything good. Hello, Carl. Hello, Albert. Hello, John. Hello, Martin. Hello, Richard. Hi, Stephanie. Hi, Jay. Hi, Ghost of Dead Pirate Roberts. Hello, the plebiscite uncle. Hello, Jay Richardson. Hi, Stafford. Hello, Richard Hughes again. Greg Stahowski. Hello, I haven't seen you in a while. Hi, Carl. Hi, Jay Lingworth. Or said hi. Hi, Paul Johnson. Hi, Angus Sunnell. Hi, Adam Crow. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all well. Right, I'm just pouring out some iron brew because that's traditional for Bru Ships. And if I look at all hyper or tired, you all know why. Oh, it was a fun night, let's be honest. Probably not my smartest decision in the world to go charging out to see if I could catch the people, but, you know, I did at least spot them, so called the police. And that helped at some point. So, if you don't mind, I am running on a very bad diet today. Ominous hissing, Richard Hughes. I'm not sure what the ominous hissing is, but Ominous hissing. Was it children or burglars? Or child burglars? We think it was burglars. Definitely think it was burglars. Opening bottle. Good night. A good sound. Oh. Yes, I had, we have scaffolding still up because of them fixing our roof. And last night we had not one incident, but two incidents of, we think, possibly the same people trying to use the scaffolding to gain access to the premises. And yeah, it wasn't exactly fun. The first time I heard noises outside here, which were definitely very heavy noises, so I charged outside and saw them up, disappearing towards the back on the scaffolding when I shone a torch up there. And then a few hours later, my sister saw ankles outside her bedroom window. So we had a really fun evening, a really fun night. They didn't try to steal the iron brew. Good for them, that. That would have caused war. That would have caused something quite dastardly. No. It was an interesting evening. Now, I do have a cunning plan of how I'm going to run things. And hopefully, it is all going to work. He says. Hopefully. You know. There's always a chance it doesn't, but it's a hopeful thing that there's a plan and it's going to work, and we'll all be hopeful of that. Now, Sam Thompson, tough luck. Might want to look into paintball masters in case of future episodes. Further work being planned. Better safe than sorry. I used to find my coyotes on my dad's property. Jerison, I've had to drive 40 miles to work at 3 in the morning to convince some curious kids to come down a 100 meters, 100-ton crane. Another time was suicidal man. Youch. Gill shake. The American in me is screaming for a need of 12 gauge. What's with him? To be honest, I'd have been happy with a 9mm hollow cap, but we'll leave that to one side. We, of course, UK, do not have guns. So, but that has meant that in the nicest way, as I haven't actually slept, and I'm currently still running on a combination of adrenaline, iron brew, and sheer pig-headedness, I didn't really fancy the idea of getting my big book of castle books down from the attic. I have a big box of castle books sitting up there, which I put up there because I needed space in this room to actually exist. So a couple of months back, I put them up there. Now, it would be really useful to have them down. I was planning to get them down today, but anyhow. So today is going to be slightly less castle-centric and slightly more battle-centric than I had been planning, but it has got some cool books in it. Some very cool books. Yowza. I do have these, but well, you know me in DIY. There's all sorts of things around this house. But anyway, let's get off the topic of my attempted burglars because, frankly, I've had to chat with the police all day about it, and it's starting to bore me. Or rather, it's starting to cause me. It's going to cost a lot in video cameras at some point. I have the thing, and I have 2 books by someone you won't hear about often in terms of the books. J.F.C. Fuller. Yes, he wasn't just a theorist. He liked to write books, history ones. And this is a double billing. I have also got volume 1 somewhere as well. There is volume 2 and volume 3 here, and I have volume 1 as well somewhere, but I cannot for the life of me find it today. Or rather, I actually haven't been able to find it most of this week. I knew I was going to do these books, whatever, but finding volume 1 has proved an interesting debate. So this is volume 2, this is volume 3, and he also reportedly did a volume 4, but I'm not quite sure. But they are decisive battles of the Western world, and this volume 2 covers from the defeat of the Spanish Armada to Waterloo. And this covers from the American Civil War to the end of the Second World War. So according to him, there were no decisive battles between Waterloo and the American Civil War. We'll leave that one to one side. Jerison, didn't he get locked up in the tower for a couple months in 1929 for having Nazi symphonies? Yeah. No shape. Not living up to the stereotypical British historian with old weapon. they found in the castle. No. But I really do enjoy my carpentry. And I love to build things. So you can imagine what I have in my store cupboard. Although personally, yeah. So, this one is cool. Staff Thompson. Ooh, speaking of the tower, is it a fort, camp, stronghold, or castle? It's a royal castle, which makes it a rather special place. Because a royal castle is part palace, part castle. It's always fancier, it's always swankier, and it's always big. Richard Hughes, hammers are very effective. Yep, they are. So, let's consider what things are. So, his chapters in here. The rivalry between England and Spain, defeat of Spanish Armada, disruption of Christendom, the battles of Brettonfield and Lutzen, 1631 and 1632, constitutional struggle in England, the Battle of Naseby, 1645, the Ascension of France, the Battle of Blenheim, 1704, the rise of the Muscovite Empire, the Battle of Pulva, 1709, the rise and expansion of Prussia, the battles of Rossbach and Leuthen, 1757, the expansion of British Empire in India, the Battle of Plessy, 1757, also, the struggle between England and France in North America, the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, 1759, the revolt of the American colonies, the capitulation of Saratoga, 1777, and the progress of the rebellion, 1778 to 1781, the Battle of Chesapeake and the Siege of Yorktown, 1781, the coming of the French Revolution, the Carronade of Valmy, 1792, the maritime struggle between France and England, the Battle of Trafalgar, 1805, the continental struggle between France and England, Phase 1, the battles of Jeun and Austerlitz, 1806, continental struggle between France and England, Phase 2, the Battle of Leipzig, the campaign of 1814, and the Battle of Waterloo, 1815. Now, I know he's a land-based general, but the thing is, I like this book because what it does is it does a chapter of context and then a chapter on the decisive battle, a chapter on the context, and then a chapter on the next decisive battle. And that's what it does the whole way through, which is a lovely setup. My main objection to this book is that, like many, many books about decisive battles of the Western world and all these things, they ignore sea battles. As far as they're concerned, there is one decisive naval battle, the Battle of Trafalgar. This one includes the Spanish Armada. Well, hey, it's got a second one. There have been a lot more decisive naval battles than that, and naval battles are often very decisive if you're a naval maritime power, if you're an island nation. They are decisive. If they're between land-based powers, it's less so. Hi, Kilo 19. But this is a cool book, and let's see. Do we have section rich? And I'll do. In 1649, Blake was aged 50. By profession, he was a merchant who had considerable knowledge of the sea, and as in his day all merchantmen were armed to fight pirates and privateers, he may have had some experience of sea fighting. In the First Civil War, he had commanded a regiment in the New Model Army. And because of this and his sea experience, he was selected by Cromwell as one of his generals at sea, who soon were to be known as admirals. Of him, Clarendon says, he was the first man that declined the old track, and made it manifest that science might be attained in less time than was imagined, and despised those rules which had been long in practice to keep his ship and his men out of danger, which had been held in former times a point of great ability and circumspection, as if the principal art requisite in the captain of a ship had been to be sure to come home safe again. He was the first man who brought the ships to contend castles on shore, which had been thought ever very formidable, and were discovered by him to make a noise only, and to fright those who could rarely be hurt by them. He was the first that infused a proportion of courage into the seamen by making them see by experience what mighty things they could do. if they were resolved, and taught them to fight in fire as well as upon water. And though he hath been very well imitated and followed, he was the first that gave the example of that kind of naval courage and bold and resolute achievement. That is the thing I do love about this Fuller, though. He has a knack for finding these gorgeous quotes. I'm not sure how he does it. He must have had contacts in every single archive up and down the land. He must have had an extensive network of friends, or he must have just floated from archive to archive and found the best archivist to help him, because he finds all these gorgeous quotes about things and about people. If you want to hear about people as they were described by their contemporaries or near contemporaries, okay, there are some slight biases towards certain things, and frankly, personality-wise, we might not agree with all his politics, but the books are gorgeous, and I don't think he's allowed to get any money for the books anymore. Hi, Jeff Miller. Richard Hughes. Dr. Clark, have you been to Malparak in Poland? It's the biggest castle in the world. I have been twice. It's an amazing place. Go see it. I would like to go see it. It's on my list of things to go see. Jermak, selection of battle sounds Anglo-centric. Were there anything from 30 Years' War or Northern Wars and growth of Russia? Let's see. And there is the there is a whole section about Muscovite. So let's see. The rise of the Muscovite Empire and the Battle of Poltava would probably be that section, which is 156. The two new powers now step onto the stage of Western history, Russia and Prussia, and as related in Volume 1, Chronicle 12, the history of the former opened in the middle of the 10th century with the occupation of the Lake Ilamen region by the Norsemen and the establishment at Novgorod of the House of Rurik. The next great event rapidly followed. It was the forceful conversion of the Varangians and their subject peoples to Christianity by Vladimir, Prince of Kiev, 980 to 1015. Married to Anna, sister of the Emperor Basil II, the faith Vladimir chose was that of the Orthodox Church. Though this conversion constitutes the first true cultural contract of Russia of the West, the adoption of Greek faith alienated the Russians from the Catholic Europe. That is Fuller. But of course, there is Volume 3. And as I said, I do have Volume 1, but I have no idea where it is. I picked them up as a set for... Let's see. Let me see. I picked them up as a set for £15. So that was quite cool. Hi, Sean Mac. Sure, Mac, I'm here on my phone, so if I ban somebody, it's probably an accident, unless it's Neuhauser. He probably deserved it. Warlord Titan Tiberius, Dr. Clark, if you could sit down with 5 important famous naval people from history in a round at the table discussion, who would they be? Of course, you'd be able to understand them all, right? Ooh, who would I want to be? Well, I'd like both Admiral Henderson and Admiral King there, because I'd like to talk to the two men who built their navies. And in many respects, that's what they did do. So I would like Admiral Henderson and Admiral King there, because I think that'd be an interesting construct. I'd like Admiral Collingwood, because he'd be quite fun. Probably Admiral Zheng He and... Admiral Bankert. I'd really like to chat with him, because he's one of those Dutch admirals of that period who we know so little about, and frankly, he'd be really cool to talk. The other option would be Trump Senior to ask him how disappointed he is with Trump Jr., but it seems fairer to get Bankart there. Paul Johnson, Volume 3 is £58 on Amazon. Yowza. I've got Volume 3 here. As I said, I have got Volume 1 somewhere. I just can't seem to find it. It's gone wander about. I think it's probably over there somewhere in that big pile of books, but I can't spot it. I've gone through it twice and haven't been able to find it. So, by gum, these things happen. Anyway, Volume 3. The Industrial Revolution and the Rise of American Imperialism. The 7 Days Battle, 1862. Chronicle 2, Progress of the American Civil War, 1862 to 1863. Chapter 2, The Siege of Vicksburg and the Battle of Chattanooga, 1863. The Expansion of Prussia, the Battle of Sedan in 1870. The Rise of Japanese Imperialism and the Expansion of Russia in the Far East. The Siege of Port Arthur, 1904 to 1905. The Foundations of the First World War. The Battles of the Marne and Tannenberg, 1914. Tactical Stalemate and Change of Objectives. The Battles of Saribert and Silver Bay, 1915. Progress of the War, 1915 to 18. The Battle of Amiens, 1918. The Struggle between Italy and Austria. The Battle of Vittorio Veneto, 1918. The Russian Revolution. The Battle of Warsaw, 1920. The Rise of the Third Reich and the Origins of the Second World War. The Second Battle of Sedan and the Fall of France. Operation Barbarossa and the Lend-Lease Act. The Battles for Moscow. The Russian Problem and the Extension of the War Pacific. The Battle of Midway Island, 1942. The War in North Africa. The Battles of Alamein, 1942, and Tunis, 1943. The Foundations of the Stalingrad Campaign. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 43. The Political and Second Fronts. The Battle of Normandy, 1944. Progress of the War in the Pacific, 1942 to 44. The Battle for Leyte Gulf, 1944. The Second World War in retrospect and prospect. The interesting thing is there are 4, possibly 5 battles I can call naval battles in this one. So there's slightly more here. It's quite good. It's quite good. This is number 3, and let's see. Let's go to a battle which is quite cool. Oh yeah, let's go to the Second Battle of Sedan. Because of the rapidity of the German advance on May 20th, the problem of the BEF and the French First Army were faced with was how to secure their right flank and rear, that is, how best to cover the northern flank of the gap. To improve his position on May the 21st, Lord Gort made a tank attack southward from Arras. Although it was quite a small affair, it came as an unpleasant surprise to the Germans and showed how jumpy they were. It created, writes Guderian, a considerable impression on the staff of the Panzer Group von Kleist, which suddenly became nervous. So much was this so that the 8th and 6th Panzer Divisions were pulled back to Anvin, St. Paul, Savy, and Sautry to form a flank guard to face the northern flank of the gap. This small and unsuccessful action clearly shows that had the French armoured divisions been trained for the counterattack and assembled behind the Allied left flank, which tactically was their correct position, Hitler Rundstadt's nervousness since May the 15th would have been justified. The latter, we are told by General Blumentritt, his chief of staff, had a high opinion of General Gamelin and the French General Staff, and was wont to say, "My little Gamelin certainly knows what he is doing." Had Hitler and Rundstedt been able to glimpse events on the other side of the hill, they would have found little cause for nervousness. They could have guessed correctly had they remembered the paralyzing effect of the tank breakthrough at Cambrai and Amiens in the previous war, and had they coupled with this the knowledge of the volatile temperament of the French, and then multiplied it tenfold, they would have obtained a realistic picture of the pandemonium that raged in the enemy's camp. On May the 15th, the news of the Ninth Army's collapse fell on Paris like a thunderbolt. Renard had seized his telephone, rang up Dardier, and asked him what countermeasures Gamelin proposed. The answer was he had none. On the following day, the cabinet met in a scene of indescribable confusion. Archives were hurried out of the windows and burned in the courtyard below, and deputies rushed about, spreading the wildest of rumours. At 4 p.m., Mr. Churchill arrived. According to Bardin, kept saying that the further the Germans advanced, the more vulnerable they would be to counterattack. Counterattack with what? Reynard demanded fighter squadrons, and Mr. Churchill agreed to send 10 squadrons and to divert the British strategic bombing force from the Ruhr to the battlefield. It is a very, very cool book. It's a very cool collection. If you can get all three, then you have a very good setup. Give me a second. It is annoying me. They can't be far. Where is it? Yep. Oh. Nope. Ay, caramba. I don't know. No idea where it's gone. No idea at all. But it is a good thing. And yes, Angus Sonnon, no Coral Sea. Mm-hmm. No, no. Amazon's selling them for between £2 and £3. Ooh. It's a good thing nothing's going on from 1815 to 1860. Yeah, I know. It is kind of a big jump. Jeff Wheeler, my copy of Moving Bases by David Hobbsbawd featuring Ishmael's Unicorn. Cool book. Very, very good book to have. Jeff, very good book. Stav Thompson, Clark, my sister, missing book. Oh, good Lord, you might be right. I wonder if my mum has nicked it. She does nick my books occasionally. I would certainly explain why I thought I had it and then now can't find it. I don't know. Derp Squad. Trump Sr. would probably spend the entire dinner on Twitter trying to get into a duel with Trump Jr. Probably. Warlord Titan Tiberius. I'd love to talk to Admiral Oswald. Not only was he a giant in physical stature, but he was one of the best IJN admirals and seemed to generally do the best job he could in a terrible situation. Yes, he did. Oh, sorry. Good day to you all. J.C. Fuller who was a pupil and close associate of Aleister Crowley, one of the most influential oculists of the 20th century. Yeah. What can I say? He was a fairly good strategist, a fairly good military historian. Wackadoodle in so many, many ways, though. And that's what we'll call it, putting it nicely. Wackadoodle. I'm being nice with that, though. No Coral Sea, no sinking to Bismarck, Angus O'Connell. Trent Lincoln, hi Dr. Quick question. Do you know of any autobiographies of Admiral Daniel E. Barbie, the amphibious commander in the Southwest Pacific in World War II? I found nothing. No. I'm trying to think if I have anything. No. I have had, I think I remember doing a similar hunt myself for that a couple of years ago, and I didn't find anything. But if you do find it, do tell me. Jeff Miller, Coral Sea was more decisive midway, I would say. Stopped Japanese expansion and damaged 2 fleet carriers and sank a light carrier. Yep. It's one of those. Yeah, well, I find Fuller. I like these books because I like the way he sets up the analysis. I like the way he gives you a chronicle or section of context and then gives you the detail. I like that as a structure. I like that as a way of making sure that everyone comes into the point at which they're reading about a battle with a similar understanding of the context and ramifications of that battle. Again, I don't always think him the best human in the world, but they are cool books. And Volume 1 is my favourite, and I can't find it. And I have a sinking suspicion that my mother has nicked it. I love her dearly, but yes, nicking books is not. She doesn't nick them, of course. She borrows them. All right. What shall we do next? Oh, this one. This is cool. Troop Leader by Bill Bellamy, and forward is by Richard Holmes, and it's a tank commander story. It is a lovely book. If you're interested in armoured warfare in any way, shape, or form, even if you just like it as a bit of variety alongside reading about naval history, this is wonderful, eh? It shows him as a sort of school days. His men, his vehicles. There are some really beautiful pictures. Little statue that they took with them in a tank as good luck. And, you know, it's just... had an interesting career. A very interesting career. And yeah, let's see. Oh, that one will do. I could hardly wait for the morning, because at orders that evening we had been challenged to get to the Somme the next day, to beat the 11th Hussars, our armoured car regiment, to it, and to capture the bridge intact. It was really thrilling stuff, and there was no doubt that my enthusiasm was shared by the troop when I gave out the details to them later. We were in the lead on the right, with Tony Venner's troop, deadly rivals for the honour, out on our left, so the squadron was to advance in a two-up formation. We could choose our own detailed route, but the objective was to capture the bridge at Hangest-sur-Somme. This was a village about 12 miles northwest of Amiens. The problem was the maps. These were poor Prince of French maps and were very difficult to read. Clearly, the very speed of the advance had taken the ordnance by surprise. We set off as soon as there was sufficient light to see by, and literally drove up as fast as the roads could carry us. Perhaps at the very early stages we showed some caution, but as the day evolved and no opposition was encountered, we grew in confidence and concentrated on getting ahead regardless. At one time I took to the fields, large cornfields with a few hedges, and was delighted to find that at the moment anyway, I was out ahead of the armoured cars, which had been slowed down by twisting roads. A little later I was not clear where I was, as I was out of contact with even my own squadron HQ. Having totally outshipped everyone, I was forced to stop and ask an astonished Frenchman if this was the road to Amiens. I received an answer in the affirmative, a handful of apples, all round, and off we went again. As we crossed one major road to the north of Puys, we spotted unidentified tanks to our right and assumed that they were part of the German retreating force. Sergeant Pritchard stayed under cover by the side of the road, acting as a point tank, while Corporal Howard and I roared down the side of the wood across the back of it, and then burst out down the reverse side to tackle the enemy from the flank. Luckily, before we fired, we saw that these were a very startled troop of Sherman tanks from one of the regiments in the 11th Armoured Division. It was a useful meeting, as they were unaware as to how far we had advanced, and this enabled them to carry on towards Amiens itself, which was their divisional objective, knowing that their northern flank was now covered. One of the interesting things about this dash through France was the speed at which the news of impending liberation ran ahead of us. We were, without question, the first members of the British Army in the localities through which we passed, yet the French were out by the sides of the road as we arrived, shouting "Vive l'Allies!" and "Vive l'Anglais!" Good news, apparently, like bad, and it travels fast. I suppose, looking back at it, that the sound of bells which were ringing in every village church acted as a beacon for the passage of news. Excitement rose as we neared the river, and when we heard that Tony Venner's troop had run out of petrol some 10 miles short of the objective, our morale reached renewed heights. However, this was short-lived, as although we managed a few more miles, Sergeant Pritchard's tank spluttered and banged to a halt as we reached the main road at Cursony. We had travelled some 63 miles that day, 45 as the crow flies, and stopped 2 miles short of the bridge itself. The other troops of the squadron, who had been refuelled by the Echelon earlier and had a few gallons of petrol in their tanks, reached the river. Unfortunately, when they got there, they found that the bridge had been blown, and despite searching, north and south were unable to cross. This is a very, very cool book. It is a wonderful story in their own words of a very different kind of warfare. But one of the interesting things is I often compare tank warfare with destroyer warfare in World War II. It's very similar. It's fast-paced. It's about maneuver. It's as much about getting a surprise on your enemy as it is about actually scoring the victories. And this is a good book for that. Thank you, Martin Dock. Can you, Richard Hughes, can you recommend any books by Richard Holmes? I've actually got a couple to my left we're going to be going through, so don't worry about that. There's going to be some coming out of that. I haven't got his book on Winston Churchill in this set, so I'll quickly grab that. This is a very cool book by Richard Holmes. It's not on today's scheduled reads, but Richard Holmes in the Footsteps of Churchill. And I remember when I was as a child being taken to the celebrated Barnum's Circus, which contained an exhibition of freaks and monstrosities. But the exhibit on the programme, which I most decided to see, was one described as the Boneless Wonder. My parents judged that spectacle would be too revolting and demoralised for my youthful eye, and I have waited 50 years to see the Boneless Wonder sitting on the Treasury bench. This was MacDonald in his attack. Winston's attack on MacDonald for the Labour leaders' proposals for unilateral disarmament. And that's quite a cool thing that he comes up with. But yeah, it's a good book. But things were beyond boyish pranks during a return visit on 20th March, when he scrambled out along a partly demolished bridge. Brooke recalled, General Simpson, on whose front we were, said, Prime Minister, there are snipers in front of you. They are shelling both sides of the bridge, and now they have started shelling the road behind you. I cannot accept the responsibility of your being here, and must ask you to come away. The look on Vincent's face was just like that of a small boy being called away from his sandcastle on the beach by his nurse. He put both his arms around one of the twisted girders of the bridge, looked over his shoulder at Simpson with a pouting mouth and angry eyes. Thank heaven he came away quietly. It was a sad wrench for him. Yep. And there's some beautiful letters and things. This is a lovely, as you would expect from Richard Holmes, this is a lovely book. This is a well put together book. And I've got some others on this here. But really, Troop Leader, fantastic book. That's the crown. My current read is Philip Bradley's D-Day New Guinea, Battle of Leonosis, doing amphibious landings. Oh, cool book. Seth Thompson, why the lack of the cartography in the past? We've been making maps of the stars since the beginning. How come not land? So many times the maps were inaccurate throughout history. Just the land isn't as interesting as the stars, I presume. Jeff Healer, except destroyers don't outrun their infantry and artillery support. No, they tend to bring it with them. Hi, Daniel. Warlord Titan Terrorist. Crow, yes. Apparently, Oswald was very nice to his subordinates. It was quite a change from most of his predecessors. That doesn't surprise me. Oswald was a big enough guy. It's kind of like Admiral Duncan. If you're big enough, tall enough, and imposing enough, you can afford to be very nice because people aren't inclined to cross you. Martin Dock. Richard Holmes Churchill book, £3, £2, hardcover on Amazon. Cool. I'm reading the SF novel Bone Silence by Alistair Reynolds, which features deep space contact. Cool. Ooh. Astocrat. Old school triangulation takes ages. The first mostly accurate maps of France ate the lives of 3 generations of cartographers. That doesn't surprise me. Right then, let's see. Next book. Okay. Now, as we all know, I love history, not just as history, but I also like it as a story. I think history has the word story in it. And I think sometimes you need to be able to read history as a story before you can analyze history properly. I like the idea of reading it and getting it good overview. Now, this means that sometimes there are books I like and I will recommend that I know many of my colleagues would not. And this collection is certainly one of them. I love this set of 3. I think they are gorgeous, and I think they have a wonderful story in them. I realize they romanticize certain things. I think actually they are fairer about certain people than other histories have been in the past. They're certainly more willing to be more critical of them. And I think the author put in a lot of effort and produced what was a very good story. Paul, Dr. Clark, do you think it made a difference that British tank units became dominated by cavalry and anti-intellectual ethos? Success in World War I came with tanks crewed by machine gun corps and infantry. To be honest, I don't accept the idea that the cavalry corps was necessarily anti-intellectual. You must remember the light cavalry had often been the reconnaissance units of the British forces. They were definitely not anti-intellectual. And the Royal Tank Regiment never ceased to exist, so they were still quite a major part of it. And in many ways, I think the cavalry had to catch up. So, these are the books. They're a trilogy on the American Civil War. They're the Bruce Catton trilogy. The Coming Fury, The Terrible Swift Sword, and Never Call Retreat. They are a very, very good collection because there isn't much that isn't covered in these books. It might not be from the modern angle that we now look at these things. It might not always have the fullest detail, but it does have, as always as part of it, it does have the story. So it's worthwhile sort of looking at. And if we take it from let's say a quote from the first one, starters, the Coming Fury. The argument over slavery thus pointed in several directions at once, and the abolitionist who declared that slavery was morally wrong was not contributing much because he was ignoring all the complexities that made the case so difficult. Yet the business might conceivably have been settled by argument and negotiation among men of goodwill if slavery had not included one element that could not be discussed rationally. For the tragedy of the African Americans and of the America to which he had been compelled to come as a valuable but undesirable immigrant was that his detention in servitude involved emotions deeper than the pit and blacker than midnight. Convulsive stirrings in the nerve system that went beyond anything with which men of that day could cope intellectually. Beyond everything else, slavery was a race problem. It was the race problem, demanding attention at a time when Americans of the blood prided themselves on their inborn superiority to people who showed even minor differences in accent, in pigmentation, or in the cultural background. No one was ready to face up to this problem. As long as slavery existed, the problem did not have to be faced. Slavery did not solve the race problem, but it plowed around it. As a slave, the African American might be a stain on the conscience, but he was not really a brother, and those who had thought he should not be a slave could spend their time happily denouncing his masters, rather than reflecting on the limitless implications of the concept of universal brotherhood of man. In slaves, the African American was under control, and so was the race problem. But if they should be freed en masse all across America, they would have to be dealt with as a human being, and a nation whose Declaration of Independence began by asserting that all men were created equal would have to make up its mind whether those words were to be taken seriously. I like this book. And what I find really interesting is it's first published in Great Britain in 1961. So this is written in 1961. And I would call for 1961 that fairly bold, assertive language. Nowadays, Bruce is considered a bit of an apologist by some and all sorts of things. I wouldn't agree with that. I'd say for 1961, for nearly 60 years ago, that's fairly strong language. Mm-hmm. Right then, let's see. Let's find. Ooh. Now we're in the second book, Terrible Swift Sword. It was precisely at this point that McClellan was told by Washington that McDowell's corps was no longer under his command. Its 33,000 men could not be included in any strategic design pursued by the Army of the Potomac. Bitterly, McClellan wrote later that this left me incapable of continuing operations which had begun. It compelled the adoption of another, a different and less effective plan of campaign. It made rapid and brilliant operations impossible. It was a fatal error. McClellan would have been more than human if he had not complained. Yet his assertion that the withdrawal of McDowell compelled him to adopt a different, less effective plan of campaign and made brilliant rapid operations impossible is obviously a rationalization devised after the event. It finally took him a month to take Yorktown instead of the hours specified in his March 19th letter to the Secretary of War. This delay cannot be ascribed to the fact that he learned, after his army had made contact with Confederates around Yorktown, that he could not use McDowell's corps. But the clear fact is that when the news reached him, McClellan had already consented to delay. He had sent back for his siege train and was preparing to shatter the Confederate works by bombardment. And the one thing certain about this operation was that it would take a great deal of time. McClellan's siege train then included 71 pieces of ordnance, ranging from a few imported Whitworth rifles and some ordinary 20-pounders and 4 1/2-inch rifles, all the way up to immense cannon which could fire 200-pound projectiles and a large number of 10-inch and 13-inch siege mortars. The lighter pieces could go by road, horse-drawn, much as field artillery moved, but the heavy ones, the really important pieces, were altogether too ponderous to be handled that way. They had to be brought up by water in barges, with derricks, sling carts, rollers, jacks, and specially built wagons to move them into position at the end of the trip. And then they had to be placed on wooden firing platforms in massive earthen emplacements, with ramps of log and earth construction leading up to the platforms, before they could be put into action. Simply to get those pieces in position was a long and laborious process. never resorted to unless the army was prepared to sit down in front of a fortified position and be spendthrifts of time. It took the army thus 5 days simply to make the necessary reconnaissance and pick the sites for the batteries, after which it took more than 3 weeks to prepare the emplacements and get the guns and mortars in position. Along with everything else, it was necessary to haul more than 700 wagon loads of powder, shells, equipment, and small stores from the Tippett Peninsula to McClellan's lines. And the program was certified time killer. The notion that the delay in front of Yorktown was due to McClellan's last-minute discovery that he could not use McDowell loses most of its gloss when it's matched against these two things: what was originally planned and with respect to McDowell, and what was actually done about him. McClellan's schedule called for McDowell's corps to be brought down to the peninsula last of all. This corps was to tarry in the Washington area, as McDowell explained the scheme to President Lincoln, until it was ascertained that the whole of the enemy's forces was down below, and then, when he, McClellan, had their whole force in hand down below, this remaining corps was to go down also. It undoubtedly made conservative good sense to hold back this fourth of the army until the enemy had been made to display his hand, but it undoubtedly had a wait-and-see quality. There was nothing in it to make any, as one supposed, the army could not act until this large segment of it reached the scene. By the way, in my worldview, McClellan is the Beatty of the American army in the Civil War. Possibly the Seymour. Strub, Doctor, speaking of stories, what did families, officers, and other rates do when ships were sent to the Far East for extended employment? In peacetime, some of them went with them, and some of them stayed at home. In wartime, they all stayed at home, mostly. Stephen Wilson, Jim Crow laws were abolished in 1964. Yes, so frankly, him writing that is pretty... Vice Admiral World War II. Yeah, not surprising that much. Cheaper to mechanize a professional expedition army than conscription army and mass armies like those of France and Germany. That was, to an extent, the British policy. That was why they mechanized everything. Then Freeman, Jeff, no, in opposition to the French efforts, it possibly, but definitely, when the exception was to be fighting a lot of Frenchmen landing in Kent, expectation was... the British Ordnance Survey in Simon Kent is preparation for invasion by Napoleon. Yeah. Jefferson, I like the way the ship doctor narrates. It's much more lively than whatever guest actor they get to drone on. Richard Hughes, would you do a presentation on Civil War ironclads? Yes, I will do. And let's do Never Call Retreat. Let's find a quote in here. Johnston's going to have to make the best of it with an inadequate force, and the same thing was true of Lee. Lee had escaped being torn away from his army of Northern Virginia, but he had to get through the autumn with that army sadly under strength. Longstreet's corps had been detached in the hope that it would quickly return once a Western victory had been won. The victory had been won, but the missing corps had not returned. After sharing in the long failure to exploit the victory, it had been sent off towards Knoxville to destroy Burnside, and this move had accomplished nothing better than to worry Mr. Lincoln and to alarm the East Tennessee Unionists, who feared that the secessionist power might re-establish itself amongst them and inflict horrid indignities. Longstreet did make Burnside withdraw inside his fortified lines at Knoxville, but when he attacked those lines, he was repulsed, and not long afterwards, Sherman came on the scene with a powerful relieving column from Chattanooga. Longstreet had to withdraw, and now he was marooned in a mountainous border country along the Tennessee-Virginia line. He rejoined Lee in the spring, lighter by the loss of various illusions. Meanwhile, it was necessary to realize that Tennessee probably had been lost for good. Lee's army had been active enough all summer and fall, but the most that can be said was that it had avoided disaster and had kept the Federals from mounting a real offensive. When Lee crossed the Potomac on his way south from Gettysburg, Meade followed, going east of the Blue Ridge and planning to strike Lee's flank when the Confederate army came through the mountain passes. Meade maneuvered skillfully, and late in July he found the opening he wanted in Manassas Gap. With almost half of Lee's army at the east of the Blue Ridge, and the rest of it still trying to get out of the Shenandoah Valley, the opportunity was glittering, but Meade tripped over the same thing that had tripped Bragg: inability to get a subordinate to execute a good battle plan. He ordered the new commander of his Third Corps, Major General William H. French, to go through the gap and attack, and a vigorous blow might very well have disposed of Ewell's corpse and possibly a good part of AP Hills, and this, coming on the heels of the terrible losses at Gettysburg, would almost certainly have brought the curtain down on the Army of Northern Virginia. But French skirmished weakly with one brigade when he should have struck with his entire corps, backed by all the rest of the army, which was coming up fast, and the opportunity quickly vanished. Lee brought his separated corps together safely and took up a good defensive position south of the Rappahannock River. And here, halfway between the two capitals, separated by a river that had seen much campaigning and would see much more, the two armies caught their breath and waited to see what would happen next. As they waited, Mr. Lincoln noted an oddity in the military art and raised an interesting question, a civilian's question, awkward and somewhat innocent, but hard to answer. Meade had asked Halleck whether the government wanted him to take the offensive. He thought the risk would be substantial, and he did not think he could accomplish much, but he would move forward if Washington wanted him to. Lincoln told Halleck he had neither orders nor advice to give, but he said there was this one point above him. Lee had with him, and available at Richmond, of all arms countering extra-duty men, probably 60,000 soldiers. Meade estimated numbers in the same way, but had about 90,000 for a good 3-2 advantage. But apparently, to stand on the offensive on ground of one's choosing, as Lee would do, if Meade moved against him, gave such advantage that 3 could not safely attack 2, and so when the 2 of the defensive, the 3 were immobilized. If the enemy's 60,000 are sufficient to keep our 90,000 away from Richmond, why, by the same rule, may not 40,000 of ours keep their 60,000 away from Washington, leaving us 50,000 to put up some other use? Having practically come to the mere defensive, it seems to be no economy at all to employ twice as many men for that object as are needed. With no object, certainly to mislead myself, I can perceive no fault in this statement, unless we admit that we are not the equal of the enemy, man for man. I hope you will consider it. By a singular chance, Mr. Lincoln wrote this letter the day the Battle of Chickamauga began. Before the week was out, he provided his own answer. That is, he had Stanton and Halleck take 2 army corps away from Meade and send them to Tennessee. I love these books. These are great, as you can hopefully tell from the reading, they are great stories. They are well written, well put together. And yes, okay, it's a complicated story in terms of the politics in the books, but for his time, it seems fairly liberal and quite nice to me. Gilshake, do you think McClellan was trying to repeat or influenced by the historic previous battle at the location in order to connect himself to General Washington? I think McClellan was a glory hound who would have done anything to try and give himself good press. Jabila, McClellan could organize like nobody's business, but he was tactically a timid commander. I'm not sure even if he could organize that well. So, how do you rate Cornwall Sharp series? I quite like them. I have a few. I have quite a few fiction books over the years, but again, quite a lot of my fiction books are currently upstairs in the attic in boxes. Because I brought all my books home from all the my offices. And, well, I got in with organising them. But that meant I had to get rid of, to free up bookshelf space, I had to get rid of some of the fiction books. And they've gone in boxes, as have some of the history books from those offices have gone in boxes. And they're all up in the attic. That's why I need Lugard to deliver. So if anyone does know, has any good contacts with Lugard, the lovely people who are delivering our garden offices, please do tell them to hurry up. The clerks would really like them. Gilstraight, did General Grant have a better grasp of naval needs and capabilities than other American Civil War generals? He was far more happy to let admirals do their thing than try to micromanage them. He realized that the sea and, in to an extent, the rivers were not like the land, and worked with them rather than against them. Danny Freeman, while I know it's not an reliable source, an initial look at Wikipedia does not suggest any deliberate coordination between British and French mapping services in their efforts. There wasn't, really. McClellan should have been in Washington advocating for army organizing training of troops. To be honest, no one would trust him with doing that. He was far too political. He was far too interested in running against running against Lincoln for president than he was actually in commanding an army. And for him, the Sharp books are fun, in some cases well researched. I say that because my mum worked as a researcher for him for some of them. Cool. Jay Harrison, oh, you managed to buy a garden office. Yeah, my sister has put it on her credit card. Which is probably not the most sensible thing, but both of us, like, it's going to sound strange. We don't like the idea of teaching from our bedrooms to teaching students, and to an extent, it worked for me living in a sort of family scenario because I've been able to contribute a little bit, and I'm going to do all the inside into carpentry and put up all the shelving, and she's buying them from Lugard, and they're going to assemble them. Admiralty of Fluff. Is there anything as good as Patrick Brown's book, Master and Commander for the Age of Steam and Steel? Ideally available on Audible. There is. But where is my copy of it? Ah, yes. Douglas Riemann. Admiralty of Fluff. Douglas Riemann. He's got a book called Battle Cruiser, and I've got a few others like that, which are very good. Trentelenko, U.S. Army in 1860s believed Army officers of equal rank to USN officers outranked them. Grant ignored this conceit in favor of winning. Yep. Whereas the Royal Navy was always known that officers of equal rank, if they're Royal Navy, they outrank the other one. Right, let's do... What do I fancy? What do I fancy? Oh. Well, I have a 2-for-1 here, in that these are both Robert Kershaw's Tankmen. And it shows how much I love this book that I have got it twice. And both times I have picked it up secondhand and saw it for, oh, that's cool. And it's the human story of tanks at war. And the reason I have 2 copies is because I actually use this book when I'm teaching the mechanical engineering students at Kingston. When I'm teaching them history of engineering, and I want to give them a good example of the practicalities of things, because I'm always trying to stress the point when I'm teaching history of engineering that, yes, something might be theoretically perfect in terms of engineering, but is it pragmatically perfect under the realistic scenarios it's going to operate in? I.e., is the scenario that it's going to be used in going to allow for perfect operation? If not, does a perfect operating system work in a less than perfect scenario? Danny Freeman, Alexander Kent was a nom de plume of Douglas Riemann for his Nelsonian era books. Yep. He did all sorts of things. So let's go to this one. Tankmen. Fuchs's Panzer Regiment had fought its way down the Ostov Road in western Russia at the outset of the campaign. Fluttering by the roadside amid the debris of war was Russian tank crewman Alexander Golikov's last letter to his wife. I can see the road, green trees and colourful flowers in the garden through the holes in the tank. Life after the war will be just as colourful as these flowers and happy. I'm not afraid to lay down my life for this. Do not cry. You will likely not be able to visit my grave. Will there indeed be a grave? Nobody would know. The only certainty is that the letter was retrieved by German soldiers searching the shell-scarred tank hull. Geography and maths made up the third surprise and inherited the effectiveness of Blitzkrieg. In relative terms, the 4 panzer groupmen, followed by their supporting marching infantry, represented arrow shots into empty space. The 1,200-kilometer wide new front expanded to 1,600 kilometers as the Oster approached Moscow. The objective, 1,000 kilometers in depth. It is calculated that 280 divisions would be required to man a continuous tenuous front across these distances, and the Germans invaded with 127. The logistic effort was stymied by the inability of the Wehrmacht to supply system to support effectively beyond its 500 kilometers sustainable rail and lorry reach. Russian tank training establishments and the armor schools were evacuated to the interior. Utilizing the immense depth of the Soviet Union, Vasily Zhukov trained at the Stalingrad Armor Academy. Deep in the heart of Russia, he remembered, we didn't feel the tragedy of the retreats and defeats of 1941. We were quite far from the front. With the advantage of geography and limitations of German strength, we started to realize, he explained, that the war would last for a long time. As the panzer advance was resumed beyond Smolensk, Leningrad in the north was reached in August and encircled the following month. At the same time, an unprecedented drama unfolded in the south around Kiev. Hitler confounded the Russians who believed Moscow was the next objective by swinging Goodrin's army group center, Panzergruppe South, while directing the southern Panzergruppe under von Kleist northwards. The battles around Kiev netted 5 Soviet armies, 50 divisions, the size of Army Group Center when the campaign began. It represented the pinnacle of Blitzkrieg success. History's largest battle of annihilation, replicating Hannibal's Cannae victory of 2016 BC. The Russians could not see it coming because of the unprecedented distance involved. The pocket formed between Kiev, Krapnik, and Trusvik in southern Russia was an area of 135,000 square kilometers. Inside were between 500,000 Russian soldiers. Contemporary German soldier accounts refer to the horizon after horizon of cornfields and sunflowers. Orientation in Russia was as difficult as the desert. The landscape here is bleak and desolate, wrote Fuchs. If we weren't here to fight and were only here to live, exist here, we would become imbeciles. Otto Karius was likewise depressed. Our orders were move on and on again, day and night, around the clock. The impossible was demanded of drivers. Soon even I was sitting in the driver's seat in order to relieve our exhausted comrade for a few hours. During a smooth period of the advance, Karius recalled, we scarcely noticed how dog-tired the exertions of the march had made us. There was a cumulative toll. Only when we halted did we drop where we stood and slept like dead men. Fuchs, like many German soldiers, was accustomed to short campaigns and returning to the comparative luxury of their barracks. He hated the filth. If I only had some water to wash myself, he wrote, the dirt and the dust cause my skin to itch and my beard to grow. Is it growing longer and longer? Wouldn't you like them to kiss me now? He asked his wife. I'm sure you can see the dirt on the paper on which I write. This is a good book. It's a very, very good book, Robert Kershaw. And it's interesting listening to it because when I first read it, it dispelled many myths about armored warfare, for starters. And I read it many years ago first, but also it was the first book I read which didn't put German armored warfare on a pinnacle in World War II. And it really intrigues me, this idea that actually, no, they weren't all conquering. They weren't all that great. And the short campaign scenario, and they like to return to barracks, and they like this. It's all pointed in as they are very different soldiers. Yes, they're very good in the right circumstances, but they're not very good at adapting beyond those circumstances. And it starts to come in, and it's a really interesting take. I don't agree with everything he writes and everything puts in there, but it is a really interesting system to take. Trent Telenko, that's Clark. Are there any books focused on the amphibious operations in the US Civil War? The Catton ones aren't focused, but they do cover them in great depth. Really, really great depth. Thank you, Martin Dock. Tankmen from £9.40 on Amazon. Angus O'Donnell, the dirt upon the paper on which I write. Daniel Freeman, but Panthers are cool. Strange question. Having 3 male bunnies named for warships, Rodney, Tillman, and Graf Key. I'm looking for female names in the same line. Any suggestions? Oh. Elizabeth. So it's got to be Queenie. Queen Elizabeth. Dainty. A daring class destroyer. And Cleopatra. C-class cruiser. Oh, right then. So yeah, that was that's a good book. That is a good book. And what else shall we get at? Ooh. Right. Next book is going to be Zhukov, but I'll be back in a second. A day of drinking iron brew. It's the only explanation I need to give. That was close. But no cigar. You didn't get to take me down, books. You didn't get to take me down. Right now. Yeah. Let's go with this one. Nighthawk Productions isn't Hello Nighthawk Productions for starters, and isn't Electra used the girl name for start time? Yes, it is. In fact, one of my girlfriend's nieces is called Electra. Scott, would the Deutschland class have been good convoy escorts? Guns big enough to potentially damage enemy capital ships raiders, but its slow speed doesn't matter as it's stuck to a convoy. Yes, this is one of the jobs which me and Daniel Freeman have found for them. Jeff Beer, Canadian corvettes were a town and city class except for our own ones given back to us. HMCS Moose Jaw is my favorite. Ooh. Right. Zhukov. John Colvin's book, The Zhukov, The Conqueror of Berlin. And Zhukov is... You see, we spend so much time reading about Gudrun and all these people and thinking, they must have been good because they do good press at post-Second World War. But really, none of them are in the same league as some of the Russian ones which they face. Khrushchev, Zhukov are really, really excellent, if slightly diabolical, generals. And I'd say definitely have equals in Patton, Montgomery, Slim, in my opinion. Delta Squad. Only problem being the Germans had no common escorts. This is the point. This is a lot of problems with the Deutschland class. They are so many. Well, actually, I think our two main uses that we came up from in the Singartental 1939 was that Deutschland class would be sent to either the Black Sea, where they could join the Bulgarian Navy, and therefore we could ignore them, or they could be used to convoy things, slow things. Anyway, maps. This book has tons of maps, which is quite good. And again, the old thing is, it actually looks better when it goes take back. This is a really, really cool. No Harold Alexander, no William Gott, Jerison. I wouldn't really call them tank generals. I call them more. You see, they sit more in the strategic commands, in my experience. Zhukov, after his first encounter with the dictator, had said Stalin's appearance, his soft voice, the depth and concreteness of his judgment, his knowledge of military matters, the attention with which he listened to my report, all impressed me indelibly. Zhukov may have similarly impressed Stalin, for it was at that meeting that Stalin offered him command of the important Kiev military district and promoted him general. By June 1940, when Zhukov arrived at Kiev, the Nazi-Soviet pact was 10 months old. Space does not allow for a full description of this pact, which is popular shorthand for both the German-Soviet Treaty of Non-Aggression signed on 23rd of August 1939 and a political settlement between the two countries that followed it, including the accompanying secret protocols. In essence, the pact gave Hitler a free hand in the West and Stalin freedom to operate in the East, Poland having been carved up between the two. Non-aggression in this context was a totally cynical expression, allowing both parties aggression in the sphere of their choice. Hitler's foray to the west apparently appeared to be entirely successful. The Battle of France would be lost and Britain would soon stand alone. Following the Soviet-Finnish War, which ended on 12th of March 1940, efforts have been made to improve combat training and education in the requirements of the war in the Soviet army, with emphasis on cooperation between arms, physical training, and surprise and junior leadership. Exercises, some under the supervision of the Commissar for Defense, now S.K. Timoshenko, were frequent, and contributed to the skill and gallantry seen on the southwestern front at the beginning of Barbarossa. Timoshenko, one of Zhukov's predecessors at Kiev and the victor in the Finnish War, had become defense commissar in May 1940, with the opportunity to end Voroshillov's incompetent 15-year reign, and to overthrow his view of the army as a branch of politics. Voroshilov was rated by Khrushchev as the British bag of shit in the army. After its poor showing in Finland, Timoshenko was determined to modernize the army, especially as regards training, supply, and intelligence, to reinstate unitary command, and to revive Zhukov's aim of achieving a professional army undiluted by political correctness. Ranks were reinstituted, discipline strengthened. Under Timoshenko, a number of key promotions and appointments were made. Pavlov, Volotutin, and Gorkov, the latter to intelligence, Fedorenko to command the armoured forces and reverse the breakup of large armoured corps in favour of 29 mechanized corps. Zhukov to Kiev from his promotion to Chief of the General Staff of the Soviet Army. At the end of 1940, Zhukov read a paper on the nature of modern offensive operations at a conference in Moscow of the top eloquents of the Army Command, also attended by members of the Politburo. The then Chief of the General Staff, K.A. Medzotov, spoke of the inadequacies of senior officers as a result of mass promotion of junior officers to high ranks, a tacit recognition of the purges and their consequences. General D.G. Pavlov spoke on the mechanized corps used in the offensive, their very high mobility, battering force, and lesser vulnerability to air attack strikes and artillery. All these attending stressed the need to build up the tank and mechanized forces, which Pavlov's own poor judgment had reduced after his misreading of the Soviet experiences experiment in Spain. Perhaps, subsequently, he had learned the lessons of the German success in France in 1940. It's a really, really cool book if you want to understand what's going on in Russia. Zhukov. And it's an interesting diagram of it. Jeff Miller, what do people think of David Glatt's Soviet Army histories? Some better than others. Gentlemen, anything compared to Zhukov, Roscoff, kind of rivalry during Berlin operation would be Monty and Patton, prima ballerina dancers. To be fair, actually, Monty and Patton in real life got on. The interesting thing is the movie, which was advised by, what's his name? Then Chief of the General Staff, Chief of the United States Army Staff. Anyway, the guy who took over after Eisenhower, basically, didn't get on with Monty and didn't get on with Patton because both of them thought him a bit twittish. Anyway, he wanted to change that narrative because he wanted to make Patton a recruiting tool for the US Army. So he changed it to a Monty Patton rivalry in the movies, and that has, to an extent, become quite a lot of history. Bradley, thank you. Yes, Bradley basically rewrote history to suit himself there. Thanks to the fact he got involved in making the movie. Richard Hughes, there's no need to insult the Bulgarian Navy. The Deutschland class would have actually been useful for the Bulgarian Navy. The Black Sea, they would have been the rulers of the Black Sea. Let's be honest, the Deutschland class in the Black Sea would have been gods. Anywhere else in the world, they had to run into battleships. Jerison, William Gott was definitely a tank general. He was arguably a better tank commander than anyone else. He turned a diversionary attack into a major counterattack, capturing 130,000 Italians. Agreed. But, yeah, the trouble is that was Italians. Who I do stand up for and say were good officers, but it means he doesn't get the same rep as the others because they were Italians. Sorry, just realised I was off-centre. Terrible. The Bradley is a great vehicle. Yes, the general it was named after, not so great. Asakra, I realised the other day that I'm only a couple of years off of having a newbie at work, born after I started here. Very scary thought to have. Ooh, that is scary. Juicy Sidron, not getting along with Patton is not a bad thing. Dude was an appalling human being. I will give you some of that. Again, he has a bit of a weird rep. It's, again, some of the stuff about Patton is not the truth. And it's like some of the stuff about Monty. They both get their negatives played up a lot by people who didn't like them, who were better at politics than they were, and liked to play up that they were not as smart or as nice as they could have been. There is a difference when you're being the top officer than when you're being one of the subordinates. I did say that, do admit that the Italians were good soldiers. I'm just saying that because you beat Italians, you get less of a reward, or you get less attention than if you beat Germans or Russians or Japanese or Americans or Brits. Basically anyone else. If you beat the Italians, it's a case of, that's good. It's like a tribal class destroyer drove off an Italian battleship. They should have been awarded a Victoria Cross for it, but they weren't. Jerison, I would say Patton was abrasive, pushed his troops hard, but the troops loved him. I'll broadly go with that. John Sharmack, Monty's and Patton's relationship strikes me as a similar thing to Turner and Holland Smith. They disagreed violently at first. When they got to know each other, they actually turned out to be good friends. They did, and it was they had the kind of friendly competition going which enhanced both their operations. Jefferson, the Italian campaign in East Africa is no joke. The Duke of Astoria is easily one of the best commanders of the 20th century, but very people know about him. I agree, he was fairly decent. He was also one of the ones that actually Mussolini didn't like that much, so I explain why he was given the Africa command. There again, in East Africa, he did have overwhelming advantage, and then very shortly after that, the British turned up with overwhelming advantage and kicked him back out. Oh, that sounds like the sort of debate that Jennifer, I was reading there was a debate between Churchill and Harold Alexander about whether Monty or Gort should have 8th Army, and Gort's death solved that one. I would agree that is probably something that Alexander and Churchill would have had. And as we're on Desert War, and I have sitting next to me Alamein. Now, this is Iain Gale's book. Blood, Guts, and Glory, a novel of men at war is what he's called as. And it's it's a good book. It's a different take on it. It is a different take, and it's quite an interesting take. Let's take sort of a quote and let's read it out. He listened to the tune, the regimental march. The Campbells are coming. His stride lengthened, and he looked right and left and saw the effect the music was having on the men alongside him. The tune now was Highland Laddie. Another man appeared, an officer. Stan wasn't sure who he was, but he noticed that he had a megaphone and was shouting through at the men, "Keep up there! You don't left that man straight in the line." Someone turned to the left and found his batman, Baines, who was walking alongside, just as if they might have been out for a morning constitutional. Baines, run down the line. Tell Sergeant Dawson to keep his direction by marking from the right. From the right, Baines, got it? Baines nodded, sped off. Samuel walked on, and as he did, just as he might have been out walking on a Highland road, led with the tip of his walking stick. He looked down at it. What the devil was he doing with that in his right hand? For chill, he realized that rather than the rifle he had intended to collect from CHQ, he was now advancing against the enemy, armed only with a .38 revolver and a stout ash stick. He smiled to himself. Then he thought that soon someone was bound to be hit, kill the wounded, and who would be able to borrow their rifle. Who would it be? He wondered. Which of the men he had come to respect and admire? Perhaps it might even be him. Well, they would know soon enough. As if in answer, a new sound began, which had a higher pitch than the whining of the shells and explosions. It was a tighter, sharper noise, yet still unmistakably that of a gun. A machine gun, a Spandau, he guessed, or perhaps a Breda. Whatever it was about to make contact with his men. As the thought left him, he saw the streams of trace bullets tearing diagonally towards them through the moonlight. He turned to the man on his right, the pace checker's job was to count the number of paces forward the company had taken from the start position. The man looked at him, his face lit in the moonlight, and Samuel saw that he was grinning. How many paces, Roberts? Dunno, sir. Lost count. We've done that many. Good, innit? Like bleeding bonfire night, sir. Hardly had the words left his lips when another note was added to the symphony of shells and bullets around them. Crump, crump, crump. Mortars. Christ, he thought, they've zeroed in on us. Bastards. Mortars. And as he thought the words, the bombs began to land among them, exploding in their deadly shards of shrapnel in all directions, at anything that from head to waist height. There was a loud crash to the left, and Samuel heard a moan, "Oh God." looked across and saw one of the men tumble to the ground. The officer, who was shouting again, through his megaphone. Samuel strained to hear his words above the din and failed. He turned to his front, and in the moonlight and flashes of the explosion, saw a wire ahead of him. It was only a single strand and stretched out at about waist height. Without thinking, he rushed towards it and jumped, as he might have done at Glenalmond, jumping the wire and winning for the house. He rose in the air and sensed that his trailing foot had just cleared the wire. The earth came up to meet him, and he managed, to his own surprise, to land on 2 feet without breaking anything. He looked behind and saw his sergeant, Perkins, negotiating the obstacle in his own way. The man was built like an ox, all muscle and no room for agility. He looked at the wire and gingerly put one leg over the top. He was just placing his weight down the leg when Samuel suddenly realized what was going on. This wasn't just barbed wire, a single-strand booby trap. He opened his mouth to shout at Perkins, but at that instant the air was split by a massive explosion as the hem of the sergeant's shorts snagged on the wire. As the explosion caught him, Samuel instinctively turned away, and a huge rush of air buffeted him on the back of the neck. In the instant, though, he was aware briefly of the outline of a man, or what at that moment had ceased to be a man, disintegrating as Sergeant Perkins was blown to atoms. As the air cleared, he turned to the men coming on behind him and yelled, all too late, booby traps. He carried on walking and wondered what it had been that had driven him to jump the wire. He had not been thinking of booby traps. He was suddenly aware that all the men around him were running. For instance, he wondered why. He could not remember hearing anyone giving order. No matter, he quickened his pace and was soon running in time with the men. His body seemed alive with the thrill moment, adrenaline pumping. His mind, his whole being, was curiously euphoric. Fear gone, he charged on and was aware that he was screaming at the enemy. He knew that his side would win. He grinned hugely and looked right and left as he ran on. Turning further to the left, he was aware of a man, Corporal Sykes, he thought it was, running alongside him and equally caught up in a moment. The man was laughing as he fired a Bren gun from the hip, and Samuel could see his mouth was wide open and he was shouting, though no words were audible. Okay, that was rather a lot to read. I do apologize, but it was cool. It's a very, very good book, Iain Gale's Alamein, and I enjoy it. Martin Duck, Alamein from £3.15 on Amazon. Thank you. Jerison, yeah, the MG3442 is called a Spandau there too. Yes. Jeff Beeler, World War II was Italy's third war in a row. They were worn down. That's true. As the Kraut, severe quality control issues did make some really good fighters, but not many of them not really unreliable engines. Yep. Dan Freeman, there was a description of the level of competence of the Italian army from their invasion of Albania from one of their own generals. They had a decent fire. If they had had a decent fire service, we would have been washed back into the sea. Dan Freeman, might have been Alan Brooke as he was SIGs. I think it might be. Monty was known to be a great trainer of men, and the worry was 8th Army needed a fresh start. The Wikipedia page on Alan Brooke says Monty was his choice for 8th Army, and while Galt was Churchill's. That, again, wouldn't surprise me. But I also would be surprised if Alexander waded in, because Alexander liked to wade in everything. And as a namesake, I can speak of this as true. When you have the name Alexander, you do feel the pressure to be the leader of people, the leader of humanity. That is something which comes with a name. But this is a really cool book. A really, really cool book. Monty was a clever sod. He was a protege of pretty much everyone. There are all sorts of senior officers who claim that Monty was their protege, because Monty was very clever to make sure he managed up as well as down. Martin Doc, Dan Freeman, have you watched Colonel Tim Collins' program on the Desert War? It's quality. It is a good one. There is also rumours of another one being made by Jeremy Clarkson, looking at all the vehicles. I'm not sure if it's actually going to happen, but I've heard rumours it will do. And it could be cool. Jeremy Clarkson, Vehicles of the Desert War. Basically, he gets to drive all sorts of things. Mitch loads. I'm lost. Anyway, right. Oh, yeah, the name thing. Maybe boss around the dog. Maybe. As long as I have enough biscuits, he'll do what I tell him to do. Ooh, what should we do next? Oh, yeah, let's do some. Pillboxes by Henry Willis, a study of UK defences in 1940. Actually, really darn cool. And if you're interested in engineering history, so let's see, is he on? Jay Richardson is on, and a few others are on, so I think you might enjoy it. The camouflaging they go to for these things are really quite cool. Some of the plans for the pillboxes. So if you decide, like me, if you're perhaps considering constructing a garden office, you might have, if you were like me, look at these plans and think, I wonder if I could build one of you, and then get told by your family you can't. Under no circumstances are you allowed to pour that much concrete and that much brick. But there are so many interesting things you can make these things look like. Close, but no loss. I always loved is the Pickett Hamilton forts, which pop up out of the ground. They can disappear into the ground, or you can, with a flick of the switch, pop it up, use your machine gun, then go down. Makes it difficult for them to focus artillery and things on you. All sorts of designs, and some of the stuff they do come up with. Let's see. Some of the defences. And I have this in as this was going to be part of the sort of the castles presentation, really, because it shows how the castles get brought up to date. You have a multi-story pillbox. Pillbox, which looks like a fortification. An old star one. A Victorian folly at Anglesey hides this pillbox from obvious view. You look, you can see the pillbox hidden inside a Victorian folly. Pretty darn cool, again. In this case, a garage was given away by its hexagonal shape, but the petrol pump added the extra touch of authenticity. It's actually a pillbox, but it looked like a garage. And they did all sorts of things. The idea was that you were going to surprise, and the number of houses which gained extensions. Lovely little extension added onto your house in the middle of World War II. Comes with its own home guard. Dubscott, will you look at this Zare raid at some point? I will do, yes. So Thompson, Dr. Clark, thank you for reading. That was very pleasant. Don't mean to go huggy buggy, but regards to Alex, may I ask you your sign in a I'm a fish, Pisces. Jeff Bennett, Allenbrook was first commander of 1st Armoured Division. Yep. There is a book which has gone wandering so far, but I will find it shortly. And that will be the next book after this one. If I can find it before I need it. Where it's gone to? Oh, there it's on the floor. Jerison, does the pillbox give a rebar schedule? Yes, it does. Jerison, I noticed there's a bunker or a Putney Bridge Station, one of the octagon types. It tells you how thick they are, broadly, within certain limits, but it does give you... It gives you a lot of details. A lot of details. And how they can be buried in and how they can be built up. And it's pretty darn cool, actually. I have to say, I really enjoy this sort of thing and looking at something. And then you realise, if you consider this one, it's got all the dimensions on it. All the angles, the firing points, the protections. What they offer in terms of their defence. And some of the things they go to make these things look like less than, not a castle they are. Really, they really do cool stuff. Jump. All Home Guard camouflage pamphlets initiatives are cool. We'll not say more because of younglings. Oh, geez. Lots of pillbacks along the Thames rivers. Yes, there are. That's actually a good walking tour you can do. If you get the map of them, and I have got it somewhere, you can walk along the Thames River Valley, and you can walk up one side and see the south. Usually you walk from the north, do the north bank and then the south bank. It's quite a cool trip. Did Dr. Clark talk about the Upper line in the Captivation Mountains late World War II in the hour or so I missed? No, not yet, no. Then, in terms of quality, I suspect that a lot of buildings of the Pillbox sect was somewhat for show, as Opera Sion was never taken all that seriously, at least by the RN. It was taken seriously in terms of paratrooper landings up until after Crete. And there was always the worry that the Germans might somehow pull it off somehow. But, after it was a bit of a security thing. And also it was good protection. Building our own fortifications makes you think about fortification design and makes you then look at the enemy fortifications and you know what you're looking at. And that's the thing. Go on, Neil. Castles were also meant to be homes. I doubt many people raise children in pillboxes. Depends how big the pillbox you're in. But it could... my thinking was using the pillbox as a model for a lovely office space in the garden. And that is the nice thing. It does show the defensive lines of where pillboxes were, of them sort of around the country. And the fact that they have a sort of external line, internal lines of defense of where they can put them up. And you have this sort of... The idea is that you have a defense in depth. You have a solid line going down the east coast. We also have things on the perimeter. So, yes, they make it in the perimeter. Boom, that's fine. But they're not getting far because they didn't have this line to get through and then this line. And that gives you space that you can recover. And if they do get south, there's even a line at Derby to try and protect the north. Should the south all fall. Jerison, a couple of Albanians I know were working on the under-mountain Soviet submarine base that they wanted in Albania. Enough space for a fleet of 6+ Typhoons and 40 other subs to dominate Med. Ouch. Measurements. Have a book I picked up from Fort Montevisitt Center at Charleston, South Carolina in 1980. History and Design of U.S. Coast Defensive Fortifications. Cool. Martin Ock, you should watch IKS Exploration. They find pillboxes, chain home stations, ammo dumps, fields. Most of the Second World War stuff on YouTube. I do watch it. I also go and wander around some of the things myself. There are some great stuff near where I live in Epsom. In fact, I must remember, because there is one, I've got a friend who's really looking into one on the, not far from where I live on the Downs, and I think Drac might also enjoy getting involved in that. Given the lack of guns at the time for home defense, one wonders if some of the defense in the UK might use crossbows rather than rifles for the offensive firepower. Quite a lot of them seem to be armed with shotguns. Quite a lot of farmers' shotguns came into purpose. There were a lot of those going around, and the Home Guard, quite a lot of them had small rifles and shotguns. It was a different time gun-wise. Gun clients. There are a few pillboxes around here, but they are all out on their own and not part of any stop lines. I'm not entirely sure what they were for. Might be there are ones missing, or it might be they were part of the fencing or defenses of bases. Quite often, there were also pillboxes put around airfields and those sort of things to provide them protection against paratroopers. So, in hindsight, was there ever a chance that Operation Sea Lion would have been successful? No, not in hindsight. There's this thing called the Royal Navy. They would have done their utmost to destroy you. And they would have done it. And if you think about that, that's the thing they do at Crete. The Italians managed to do an amphibious operation once the army are evacuating and the navy are leaving it. But prior to that, nothing's got by sea, which is why the interesting thing is the Battle of Alamein. Those got a pillbox of decent office might be a bit breezy and nippy in the winter. Well, I was planning on putting windows in and a proper door, but it would have been quite interesting. So Thompson, we'll send you something on Discord thinking you might like it. Catastrophic event with Earth that's under contention. Cool. Jerison, the Royal Navy would have crushed Sea Lion. Imagine the post-Hood vengeance to the power of 10. Yeah. Pretty much everything that was left from the Royal Navy's collection as accounted for in this lovely book, Brassey's 1939. This is a gorgeous book. It is a really lovely book. But let's put it this way. Some really, really cool pictures in here. Some really cool stuff. And including this picture of HMS Afridi I have never seen before. But it really does cool. And it compares it directly to the Ludemann, the Hans Ludemann, completed in 1938. So you can compare directly the British tribal destroyer with their German equivalent. And honestly, that's prettier. Beautiful book. Basically, everything in 1940 that was left of this, if the Germans had tried Sea Lion, would have been coming south of them. I'll put that in there. But no, this is a really, really cool book. And there's maps like this in it, which allow you to go find something. It's what I use most often not to try and find stuff. So let's put it this way. I go down to my region. And yeah, so I come from Surrey area, which is over here, this sort of area of Surrey. And Epsom is helpfully sort of on this sort of gap here at this point. And you can see some of the little points put around, and they are part of the inner line for London Defence. There is an outer line, which curious enough follows the M25 quite well. And they are part of the inner line. Literally positioned here. And those pillboxes are quite cool to go look at, and I have gone. I also have to say I have gone and found some other ones, and it's pretty darn cool. Cornwall. You find something really interesting when you're looking at the pillboxes in Cornwall, in that the local gentlemen seem to have considered themselves quite a good year if they built their own couple of pillboxes. So there's the official maps of pillboxes, and then there's the, well, you know, we had some extra stone, some extra this and that. None of it war materials, but perfectly fine. And we built our own pillbox, blocking that entrance there, up there. Okay. And it literally is a stone wall that thick. I thought it's a good luck tank. Go on. I also think there is one that's possibly built on a cliff overlooking a road as it makes an S-bend over and crosses a large river. That sounds a sensible position to put them. Basically, RM wouldn't have done what Kufta should have done. Would have done what Kufta should have done in the Philippines in 1944. Possibly. Rishius, keep up the terrible puns. I try to. Re-emp some in defenses. Also, one also needs to worry about the aliens landing not too far away at Woking Common. Or Wimbledon, the Wombles at Wimbledon. Must be cool to be able to find those pillboxes. Growing up around Detroit, there were a few known Nike missile installations, but very little was left of them. Rocks are basically a tour with gun slots. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much what they're building. It's just a case of, oh my lord. And there is one which I swear they have actually dug out from a rock. They have literally spent about a year or something actually carving it out from inside the rock. That is the only way you can talk. It must have been built. I doubt they've taken a cave and fortified a cave somehow. Cool. Rishi, stop bringing up Bulgaria. All right, back in a second. Right. Let's see. I don't want to not get through these 3 books, so they're going there. Right then. The Royal Surrey Regiment were formed at Wimbledon mainly to suppress the Wombles, a bit like Highlanders for suppressing the Jacobite risings. Probably. Speaking of stonework, some of the properties I'm looking at have limestone and bedrock. Was thinking of blasting or mining the basement and using the stone for foundation walls. Thoughts? That could work. Jay Richardson is probably better one, but that could work. That sounds pretty much what I used to do. This transform pillboxes now only help contribute to the increased population courtesy of Amristines, which is arguably better than their original purpose. Oh God! In nicest way, if you're an amber, you have to be very, very amorous to be getting it on in an abandoned pillbox. That's good, for sure. They already lost an unsustainable number of ships in Norway campaign. Yep, that's pretty much what the Royal Navy done to them. Mike Rose, I think for the German Navy, I'm quite lucky in so far more castles than people, as well as a few pillboxes left on some beaches. As some of the older railway lines of the valleys. Oh, cool. It is cool in Llangollen. It's a very nice railway. Right then. Castles. Now, here is an interesting book. It is compiled in 1940, at the same time as all these are springing up around the country. The British government suddenly does a survey of its castles. And by the way, if you want fun and looking at a massive fortification in World War II, have a look at Pendennis Castle. Because the British felt that they could actually defend that if the Germans were unwise enough to end up in Cornwall. Frankly, myself, I think if the Germans ended up in Cornwall, that they would really have not enjoyed themselves at all in any way, shape, or form. But I love this book. It is Castles, an introduction to the Castles of England and Wales by Her Majesty's Stationery Office. And it goes through all the different castle types. In the UK, it goes through, that it gives you the outlines, tells you their wall thickness, all sorts of things. And it's really, really cool. Here you go. Here is Pendennis. This side. And the theory was, same with Walmer Castle in Kent, actually, that tanks couldn't get into there. But if they wanted to say no to tanks, there was no tank getting in there. And therefore, it would be an excellent place to set up artillery. Which is what they, broadly speaking, did. Using several of its ramparts for anti-ship defences for the harbour in Falmouth. So, interesting castle, Pendennis. If the Germans had got to Cornwall, they would have really, really not enjoyed themselves. If they got to Devon and Cornwall, then goodness gracious me, I feel sorry for the Germans. Speaking as someone who spends quite a lot of his life down in Cornwall, the Cornish are very hospitable guests, unless you are really, really not who they want to be there. Jerison, Sam Thompson, I wouldn't blast anything under a house. If you really, really want a basement, demolish the house, then peg at the sandstone with an excavator, then blast bedrock. Yeah, that would. Doing anything under a house is going to be either handwork or it's going to be gentle if you've got the house over it. There was a stop line running north from Portland Weymouth to block any landing west of there. Sort of makes use of Maiden Castle, I think, which would not be much fun to attack. No. And surprisingly enough, I think that's another castle which appears in here. There are all sorts of castles which appear in here, which would not be fun to attack in any way, shape, or form, even if you have modern weaponry, because It takes a lot to get through these castle walls. They are big, massive things. Seriously, that's Kenilworth Castle, and that's just, look, solid black stone. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. Basically, there is no castle in here I would actually relish the idea of attacking. Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight especially looks very inhospitable. That's that one. No, that one. I was right the first time. Carisbrooke. Yeah. See? Very, very inhospitable. Really, Britain's castles were not welcoming. They were terrible of them. And, you know. So there's no surprise that at the same time as they're building pillboxes, they're suddenly doing a survey on castles. Work out where's strong enough to hold. Where can they do? JP, are we doing favourite castles yet? Ooh. My favourite one to visit is Bodiam Castle because I can go there on a steam train. I drive to one end of the steam railway that ends at Bodiam Castle and I get the steam train to the castle. Then I wander around the castle, then I get the steam train back. It might add another 30 minutes on my journey to get to the other end of the railway line from my home than to the castle, but it is worth it. So worth it. Steam train. Right. I have a feeling we'll be finishing about 8:30, judging from the amount of iron brew I've drunk. But no, favourite castle. Pendennis and St Michael's Mount are up there for me as well. St Michael's Mount is a gorgeous castle. Which I do remember the comment was that if the Germans were going to invade Cornwall and wanted to drive a tank up there, they were welcome to try, but they didn't think it would make the corners. Edinburgh Castle is nice, and the comes around it, yes. Paul Johnson, the castle in my town still shows the scars of German bombardment of the East Coast. That does surprise me. And it's probably still stood it there. Anglesey Castle. Oh, that's a nice castle as well. That's good. The more you damage a castle, the more cover you give to defenders. The assault on Monte Cristo demonstrates that well. That wasn't even a castle. I think that's a monastery as well. Built similar in practice. Jefferson, I've never been to an authentic castle. I've been to one they built in France using old techniques. Go to a proper castle. There is a difference between the two. Australia didn't bother with fortifications. The plan in the event of Japanese landing North Coast was to just retreat to the south and let them grind through the hostile landscape until death. I thought it was to unleash the emus and kangaroos. I thought it was to rerun the emu war with added kangaroo cavalry. South Thompson. J. Richard, where I'm looking at moving, it's about 2 people per 5 kilometers squared, so don't think I'd have to worry about neighbors. No, I doubt you would. Joshua Peters, in hindsight, Operation Sea Lion seems very optimistic, but these defensive preparations suggest this was not known at the time. At what point did the preparations become recognized as unnecessary? They were kept. They were always felt to be necessary because The advantage was if the Germans landed paratroopers or special operations, they had manned fortifications to hold them up. And they were good training and good practice for the fortifications which the Allied troops were going to go up against in northern France and Germany. So they were kept. Ooh, Steph Thompson, Dr. Clark, most underrated castle on the Isle in your opinion? Ooh. Ooh. Most underrated. Probably. It's one of the ones in here, actually. Probably Portchester. Because the whole thing about Portchester is it has a lot of space inside and it can take a lot of troops. So I think Portchester is the most underrated. Jeff Hiller, Chieftain asked, how can you function without sleep? Lots and lots of practice over the years. Lots and lots of practice. If you study at Durham University, you may have residence in the castle. That is a beautiful castle and it's a beautiful university. I haven't been to any Japanese castles, Golden Eagle. Sorry about that, but just haven't. Carl Gaspard, mud basket composite work composite walls also do a mighty good job in stopping lead and steel and soaking up explosives, as well as being warm in winter, cool in summer. Yeah. Grace, we do not mention the emu war. Look, it's a fine thing to rely on emus and kangaroos to fight your battles for you. It's understandable. The Soviet Union and Russia relies on martial winter, the Australians, emus, and kangaroos. Jeff Miller, Canada just had forts and ground houses, no actual castles. Had quite a few forts, though. Dijon Govrix. Off topic, do you recommend the British battleship 1906-1946 and British cruisers 2 World Wars and After by Norman Freeman? Well, I can't really not recommend them considering I have them. There, and there. So they're good books. I enjoyed them. Greg Sassy, that's right. You may have seen on Twitter the other day, there was a photo of a fortified camp French Paris built in 2017, I think in Afghanistan. But Vauban 5-point layout. It wasn't Afghanistan. It was built last year in Mali, in Africa, I think. And it's still built like that. That's what still they're building these sort of, when they're building these camps, they still build them using the same principles because you've got the fire plan. You just build them so that they can actually take a tank while rolling into their sort of towered positions or of armored vehicles so it can use its turret and fire over going bang, 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 bang from a defensive position. Jeff Miller, the Germans could still send in raiders like the theorized raid on the Isle of Wight or the fictional attempt to assassinate Churchill. Yep, which is why you have the defenses. Landhand Production, Dumb Thought. Heard you talking about weaponizing emus and kangaroos. It's probably a good thing that you can't train a cassowary. They're optimal jungle defense fighter. Golden Eagle, what do you think of Shadbrooke's castle designs? I like them. It's nice to see someone trying to build something to inspire people with history. Then Vauban was very clear about defensive arrangements in an era of gunpowder. He was. Barnard Castle is good. You can dive over 200 drive over 200 miles to visit it. Yeah, there are other castles I prefer to visit. I haven't visited Dover Castle. This is the weird thing. I live not that far, honestly, in terms of driving terms from Dover Castle, and I have never visited. I have driven past it on many occasions. I have driven near to it. I have planned to visit for my birthday on no less than 4 occasions. Never visited it. Anyway, last book tonight, as we're finishing off the Iron Brew, and last books, and I'll then do Q&A till I finish the Iron Brew, is this one. British Armoured Divisions and Their Commanders. 1939 to 1945 by Richard Doherty. It is exceptional, including finding an old business card of mine for it. It's got all sorts of maps. It has all sorts of things, and the maps are nicely at the front. It does have maps throughout, but it does have these nice maps at the front, so you can read them and understand them. It has lots of pictures in it, and it is well written. Well researched. Well written. And really interesting approach on it. So let's pick. Which one should I pick? This one will do. Where haven't we covered? Yeah, let's do 80. The leading Panzers were Mark IVs with a new long-barreled 75mm gun, the effectiveness of which was soon demonstrated, as Roberts recalled. Once one is in the middle of a battle, time is difficult to judge, but it seems only a few minutes before nearly all the tanks of the Grant Squadron of the CLY were on fire. The new German 75mm is taking a heavy toll. The enemy tanks have halted and they have had their own casualties, but the situation is serious. There is a complete hole in our defence. To close that hole, Roberts ordered the Royal Scots Greys, positioned over the crest from point 102, to move at all speed to join the CLY. As the Greys made for the seat of the battle, the Panzers advanced again, but more slowly, making for the gap in the British line. They had not spotted the Rifle Brigade 6-pounders, concealed in broken ground, and had closed to within 300 yards when the guns opened fire. Several Panzers were struck and crippled, but the Germans came on. Over the radio, Roberts was exhorting the Greys to get the whips out, as the Germans came under fire from British artillery. Then the Greys appeared over the crest from north, moving swiftly into gap. Light was fading as the battlefront was stabilised, but there was still some difficulty on the left flank, with a force of about 30 German tanks threatening 113 Brigade. However, the guns of B Battery, 1 Royal Horse Artillery, and the threat of the CLY Crusaders brought the Germans to a halt. The action at point 102 was the fulcrum of the Battle of Hafa, the second Battle of Alamein. British casualties were light, with only 1 man killed in the CLY, although the regiment lost 12 Grants and a Crusader, and 2 in 1st Rifle Brigade. 15 CLY personnel were wounded. German tank losses came to just over 20, although 22 Armoured Brigade claimed almost 70. However, 21st Panzer had lost its inspiring commander, Major General George von Bismarck, killed by a British mortar round. That night, the German Italian tanks went into lega, but British aircraft and artillery bombed their positions during the night. Little action took place on the 1st of September, although the 21st Panzer tried to slip around Roberts' flank early in the morning. A move stopped by 22nd Armoured Brigade's tanks, whilst tanks of 8th Armoured Brigades showed Rangers in Staffordshire Yeomanry, both in action for the first time since being mechanised, threatened the German right flank. When a heavy artillery bombardment forced 21st Panzer to withdraw, 8th Armoured Brigade advanced. And there was little fighting that day. 8 Armoured lost 16 tanks, while the Afrika Korps lost 13. The Desert Air Force continued making life difficult for the Panzer Army, with an attack on Afrika Korps HQ, killing several officers. Rommel considered cancelling his offensive, but deferred his decision until the 2nd. By then, his men had suffered another night of intense bombardment, and his fuel situation was even more precarious. That night, he signalled his intention to withdraw to OKH. Panzer Army did not fall back to its starting positions as the British minefields, codenamed January and February, and some high ground were incorporated into the Axis lines. With the battle ended, losses were almost evenly balanced, with 8th Army having lost about 2,000 men and Panzer Army about 3,000. Tank losses were under 40 on either side. Psychologically, the battle was a significant success for 8th Army, as Rommel had failed in his attempt to his breakthrough attempt. The British armour had fought well and in harmony with its artillery and infantry. Even so, retraining needed to continue to eliminate as far as possible the friction still existing between the arms. That became one of Montgomery's priorities, but he was able to build on Auchinleck's solid foundation, although giving Auchinleck no credit for that. This is a gorgeous book. This is the book which will tell you all you need to know about all these very interesting formations. Yeah. There are quite a few divisions that were armoured divisions in the British Army. And this goes through all of them, all their commanders, what they got up to, what they did. It explains them all. It gives them each a biography, a little sort of explanation of them. Gives you their divisional orders of battle, their strengths, their brigades at the beginnings of battles. It is, if you were interested in the nitty-gritty of armoured warfare, but also want it in a sort of put away in it's also a great story to read, and a very enjoyable thing that will teach you everything you need to know, really, and probably make playing World of Tanks, if you played out as well as World of Warships, that much better. This is the book to buy. It's British Armoured Divisions and their Commanders, 1939 to 45 by Richard Doherty. And it is gorgeous. It really is. And right, let's see what questions we've got. Costranis, what was the most epic castle siege in English history? Well, I would go with Pendennis siege, the siege of Pendennis, but there are others which would probably claim it. But I've walked the lines of the siege of Pendennis, so that's why I love it. Sal Thompson, Dr. Clark, you're forgiven, as it was the same for me and Hyder. Never got on board, but got close as I could this year. It will be fun to get there. Jeff Miller, in British Armoured Divisions, I wanted individual division histories, though. To be honest, it does accomplish that. It gives each division its own history and its own place. It does explain each division within it. And that is there. So, yes. It does it while explaining the story, but yeah. It does. It has a fun history. The armed divisions in the British Army. Let's see. Trent Lunger, are there any books focused on World War II UK tank brigades? Pretty much this is as close as you're going to get to it. Armored divisions. There is none which goes through brigade histories. So, Thompson, are there modern military castles constructed today or anything close, or even just based on their different sizes? Well, the French in Mali are doing a good example with their Vauban works. There's a few things. Basically, anytime you're talking about a forward operating base or all those ones being constructed with various wall types, etc., they're all modern fortifications and they're built along the same lines. John Shea, question: what books do you recommend for specific military formations? It depends what you're looking at. If you're looking at army formations, as in their unit histories, they're often good unit histories. But it depends what you're looking for, basically. JP, they're not enough on the early days of first and second division. There's a fair bit. Concentratus, are there any good books on Indian divisions in World War II? There are some by Indian authors, but the trouble is finding one which a book which is making use of both Indian archives and British archives to try and get the information correctly, and probably American archives as well. And I haven't seen anyone yet. I've seen some people are attempting that, but I haven't yet managed to accomplish it. Conning, I wonder if the English who used horse archers, things might be different. The English did use horse archers. There were longbowmen who used horses and fired from them. They weren't as common because if you're an archer, you're usually lower middle class and you're not really sure if you can afford a war horse. So usually they're in the retinue of the really rich lords. But they were there. Jeff Beeler, I had this book in pretty good. Patrick Delaforce, Monty's Marauders, the 4th and 8th Armed Brigades in Second World War. That is good, but it only covers the 4th and 8th. That's the trouble. It's finding a whole book of divisions, of brigades. Battle of Stirling Bridge is one of those interesting battles. The horse archers, if I remember correctly, it's not exactly easy, but yes, they could shoot from horseback. The longbowmen. They had a slightly modified longbow design. It was slightly shorter. It's not beyond the way. In a nicest way, there are the English do specialize in producing mass ranks of huge numbers of infantry of foot archers because that's what suits the battles they're fighting. But yeah, they do have horse-mounted archers who do use their bows from horses. They just don't look like the Mongol hordes because they don't have as many horses. That's the thing. You don't have as many horses, so you don't have the horses aren't as common. So therefore, what's the best use for your horses? And okay, if you're very rich, you can afford to have some horse-mounted archers. But if you're not as rich, you might as well just have the armored cavalry. Right then. So about 5 minutes to go. So I'm going to say we'll end this at 8:30 as we're getting well away from naval history. Although getting away from castles and into land battles. So, any questions before we go? Because I've finished the Iron Brew, and that is the rule for Bru Ships. I go on as long as I have Iron Brew and finished. Hope you've all had a nice evening and enjoyed the books. Nighttime Roses, just going to pluck something real quick. Hope you don't mind us talking. If you want to watch good review of Braveheart and have all its nonsense point out, go watch Cynical Reviews. Take on it. Yes, that is quite a good review of Braveheart. That's got not as many horses and not having to travel 250 miles between two neighbouring towns. Yes, these things do limit the need for horse archers. Sure, Mike. The thing people don't seem to understand is that riding a horse is really hard because that horse has its own idea of where you should go. They need you to fight while managing the horse. Yes, it requires a lot of training of the horseman. So they're not really that common because horses aren't as common in terms of war horses at the time when we're talking about English archers versus if you're talking about the Mongol hordes or the various various Khans formations. Jessica, will you get another bottle of Iron Brew tonight? It would be my fourth bottle of the day, so probably not. Probably I want to actually sleep tonight. So I will finish writing and rewriting my presentation on Crete. I'll record that all tomorrow morning. I had meant to record it to this morning, but I kept having policemen coming around. So we had policemen last night. We had policemen this morning. We had policemen all the time, which is also why. Thank you, Josh, Jim, Chrism. Thank you for the Iron Brew Fund. Super chat's always most welcome for the Iron Brew Fund. But it's a case of, how do I put it? It's like I released a sort of apology 2-minute administration video earlier where I basically said sorry to Daniel because I don't think I'm going to have edited his contribution in time for Crete on Tuesday. I just don't think I'm going to get it done because of the constraints of having work tomorrow combined with the police keep turning up and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Jefferson, good show. Prefer it when anyone is early. Feels like getting out of school early. That's good. Angus Sonner, why did the RN give up ramming bows? Because they weren't getting in ramming range. That's literally it. Golden Eagle, Mike Loads did demonstrate that horse archery long ways was possible. It was, and as I've said several times, Golden Eagle, there were horse archers with longbows. They were used, but they were very expensive to train and prepare, and they belonged mainly to things like the King's Own, the Royal Archers, and the Royal Foresters, and these sort of things. The very expensive primary units, retinue longbowmen, those sort of things. Men who were professional, very much professional soldiers who did it 365 days a year, were practiced and were the very elite of the archer formations that the British had. And they were scarily good archers. If you can imagine someone who practices archery every single day for 3 to 4 hours a day as part of their job, how good they are when they started probably doing it about... Most of them were sons of other career archers, so most of them started at sort of 13, 14, would be doing 3 to 4 hours every single day for their lives. They're very good archers. Take care. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. And take care. Have a nice evening. Thank you.